we're going to talk about what work means to us. What's the role of our work, our careers, our employers in terms of how we understand who we are? The point of this video is to help you raise your own self-awareness about how you see work in relation to your own life and identity. Organizational communication is one of my main areas of expertise. I've been teaching undergraduate and graduate classes on this for over 25 years. And for almost as long, I've been using a textbook called Organizational Communication, Balancing Creativity and Constraint. If you want to take a closer look at the latest edition, I'll put a link to that in the description below this video. I'm using part of chapter 1 in that book as a jumping off place for this discussion. I'm adding my own explanations, illustrations, and my own reflections on the topic. If we take a quick look at human history, the modern day factory, large companies, huge organizations that now dominate our lives are a fairly recent addition that only go back about 150 years. In a relatively short amount of time, our professional lives and how that work defines us has taken on a major role. In the past, we were defined in lots of ways that had nothing to do with our work, such as families, our families' reputations, the community and culture we were a part of, and social institutions we were a part of, like church or religious community. Those were the sources of our day-to-day identity. That's how people knew us and how we knew ourselves. At the same time, work has always been a part of how we've defined ourselves. Many last names in the U.S., for example, come from jobs that people used to do in the distant past. If someone today has the last name Carpenter, it's very likely they got that name because one of their ancestors was a carpenter. Perhaps it was a family business. In fact, many names like Smith, Taylor, Baker, Fisher, Gardner, and many others can be tied to the family's occupation, and those names stuck. Those families essentially ran their own small businesses and often provided that specific service to their local community for generations. One of the things that's changed today is that institutions like church, local community, and family's reputation have faded into the background in terms of their importance. And our professions, our employers, have taken on a much greater role in how we see ourselves. And the rise of large companies has eclipsed the dominance of small family-owned multi-generational businesses. In this new landscape, we all have a choice that I'd like to talk about. There are two sides of a story in terms of how we describe the extent to which we lean on our professional lives to nurture our identities. On one side of the coin, we have many people who ascribe to the live-to-work story. To them, their occupation plays a major role in defining who they are. They want to get jobs and meaningful occupations that make them feel better about who they are. They may want to work in reputable organizations so they feel the benefits of being associated with that organization's positive brand as an employee. People in the live-to-work crowd are likely to be charging hard in their careers, and they're trying to climb that ladder of success in their industry. The live-to-work approach is most obvious in high-status professions like business, finance, law, medicine, media, sports, and show business. But it's certainly not isolated to those industries. And of course, not everybody in those high-status fields have a live-to-work mentality. Some people in the live-to-work crowd might be described as workaholics, but not in all cases. You don't need to work 50 or 60 hours to draw on your professional identity to feed your personal identity. Still, because the role of our professional identities may be strong for some people, we're willing to make sacrifices in the other part of our lives because we're prioritizing our professional lives. For the live-to-work crowd, work comes first, and everything else comes after that. On the other side of the coin, we have people who work to live. The internal story that we tell ourselves on this side is that work is just part of our life, and it has to fit into our overall life. Work still may very important. They still may love their jobs and want to do something that's meaningful to them. They may even be in high-status industries, but their priorities are a little different, and they will deliberately choose a job or an occupation more generally, or a specific employer even, because it makes sense in the context of their overall life in a more measured way. People who work to live are more likely to say, I like what I do. They may even say, I love what I do, but they will also say, ultimately, this is just a job. Their job is not what they care about most, and it does not consistently take priority over other parts of their life. For example, my mother and father were both this way. They both had very rewarding and successful careers as teachers, and my father was also a well-known regional and professional musician, but their main focus was always their family. One of the reasons they chose teaching as their main occupation is that it allowed them lots of time off compared to most corporate jobs. That time off in the summers allowed them to take camping trips and go to the beach, and ending their workday around 3 p.m. allowed them to be around and available in the home most of the time. I want to emphasize that there's no right or wrong direction for how central your career is to your life and the extent to which it defines your identity, but there are pros and cons to each choice. People who live to work often do thrive in their careers and climb whatever ladder they're trying to climb fairly well. They maybe make good money and earn well-deserved professional reputation and status. If you work really hard and make sacrifices, chances are you'll have a good measure of success, and that may make them feel great about themselves. The downside, however, is that all of that energy, time, and focus sometimes happens at the expense of other parts of their lives, like relationships, family, and other interests, and in some cases, even their health. At the extreme, people who are all in on their professional life may push themselves to the point of stress, anxiety, and burnout beyond what's actually required. Another downside is when people rely on their work as their primary source of identity, they can often feel an identity crisis when they retire or lose their jobs because they have not invested in other parts of their identity to the same extent. I live in the Rochester area of New York, and one of the big historic companies here, employers, has been Kodak. But a few decades ago, Kodak started to struggle financially, and they laid off thousands and thousands of people per year in the Rochester area. And at one time, working at Kodak was a great source of pride and identity for people. But when they got laid off, it was like their hearts were broken because they were no longer part of this great thing. It wasn't just that they lost a paycheck. They lost part of their identity, and that was beyond their control. There are pluses and minuses as well to the work to live camp. On the downside, because they're more likely to put up boundaries around work, they may not have all of the professional opportunities and benefits that people have when they live to work. It's possible they get maybe passed over for some promotions if the other people around them are focusing more on their careers. They may not feel that same sense of professional status as people on the live to work crowd. Now, on the upside, many people I know who work to live still have enough success in their careers over the long run to keep them satisfied. Their balanced life may help them stay healthy and happy, so when they're at work, they're able to give their best, but when they leave work, they experience another rewarding part of their life. And of course, if they retire or lose their jobs for some reason, they still know who they are because their identity does not depend primarily on their occupation. And of course, when we look at both sides of the conversation, some of us have a mix. And a lot of how we see ourselves may have to do with the season of life that we're in as well, like our age and our marital status. When we're young, in our 20s, let's say, we might still be single and have nothing to lose by charging hard at work. And then in another season of life, we may not be able to go all out on our career because, let's say you get married, you settle down, you grow a family. That may be a season of life where relationships are your top priority. Our choices about this are not strictly tied to our season of life. That's just one way to look at it, one reason why our professional lives come into the forefront or not as we walk through all of our life and consider our other priorities. As mentioned at the beginning, this is an important topic that we need to study because we don't want to get swept up in someone else's definition of how we should live our lives professionally. It's up to each of us individually to be intentional about our life's decisions. Either way, the role of work in your life and the extent to which it feeds your identity will end up being a huge influence on how you live your life day to day. A question for you for the comments section is, which camp do you currently lean toward? Are you in a live to work season of your life, or do you have a work to live approach right now? And do you see that changing at some point in the future? I look forward to seeing what you have to say in the comments section below. See you soon.